First of all, thank you to Ad Farm for having us. This is a really interesting event. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Joshua Swati. I was raised in Ellsworth County. If you're familiar with Kansas, it's the exact dead center of the state. And if you're driving west of Salina, when you hit the wind turbines, we are generally south of there, 12 miles. I was raised on a farm. My family's been farming there since the mid-1860s. It's a fully diversified operation. In 2010, my wife and I started our own farm about 4 miles south of the main farm where I grew up. Continue to be fully diversified, wheat and sorghum and soybeans, and then a cow-calf operation, and a little under 2,000 acres total, split just about evenly between row crops and cattle. And then I do have around 120 acres that are certified organic, and I grow Kernza on those. And if you are not familiar with that, I spent some time at the Land Institute in Salina, which is a very, we were discussing regenerative agriculture earlier. That's a very progressive agricultural organization working on perennializing the major grain crops. Kernza was the first sort of out of the gate crop that they had, and it was kind of fun. In 2015, I think I constituted 1/5 of all the Kernza acres globally on my 27 acres of Kernza at the time. But if you're familiar with Patagonia, they buy Kernza for their long root ale beer. And now you can find Kernza in the Cascadian Farms cereal, in the cereal aisle, which is really kind of fun too. So that's my operation. If you ask me which I prefer between cattle and row crops, it's not even close. I hate farming, largely because of the last 3 years. I can tell you I grow wheat and sorghum and soybeans, but if you looked at the balance sheet, I grow none of those things. It's been catastrophic losses from drought. The cattle have been great. And then all of those struggle compared to working in renewable energy and agriculture, which has been a much more stable part of my life, which I think you'd find of any farm operation these days. If you are starting out and running heavy debt loads, off-farm income is critical. So.
I'm Sarah Shivers. I run a cow-calf operation in the southern Flint Hills of Kansas, down in Greenwood and Elk County. I ran that with my father for about 8 or 10 years when I first moved back to our family farm, and then about 5 years ago, my husband and I started Salt Creek Farm, which is a direct-to-consumer business, and we sell to restaurants in the Kansas City and Wichita areas, but we also sell directly to families and ship all over the U.S. and have a brick-and-mortar store in Eureka, Kansas. My background is I grew up in agriculture, but then my dad pushed me away from agriculture. I really wanted to major in ag in college, and he just kept telling me, this is too hard of a life. You don't want to do this. Go do something else. And so I did nonprofit fundraising for 10 years after college, and then came back to a nonprofit on the farm. And so, but it gives me fresh eyes. We lived in Dallas. We saw the farm-to-consumer movement growing in Dallas, and so when we were able to move back to Kansas, we knew that that was an emerging market. And we're able to kind of start that and get in on the leading edge of that as we started it. And it's been really interesting to meet chefs and consumers and make those connections and teach people kind of about the behind the scenes part of the farm, the how and the why. And I think there's a growing need and growing desire for people to learn more about how and where their food comes from.
Hi, my name is Bill Spiegel. I live in Manhattan, Kansas, but my family farm is in north central Kansas near the town of Beloit. It's in Jewell County, which is right up against the Nebraska border. I'm a fourth generation farmer. We have wheat, corn, grain sorghum, and soybeans. It's a pretty small farm by Kansas farming standards. It's only about 1,500 acres. I'm fortunate that my family owns all of that land. Just like you guys have said, I mean, it's been tough the last couple of years with drought, and so fortunately, my wife and I both have off-farm jobs. That's the only way we could probably make it. It's really about it. I don't have any exciting stories to tell.
We'll get them out of you. Don't worry.
Well, there's no lack of pain points in farming, but first and foremost, it's weather. And I would assume that my colleagues here would probably agree, but we're in probably the worst drought that I have seen. I was talking to an 83-year-old farmer the other day. He said it's the worst drought he has seen. So this year, like Josh, planted a lot of crops, just didn't harvest them. And so that's troublesome. That's probably the biggest source of pain right instantaneously. But long term, it's weed control of all things. We have weeds that we just can't kill with chemistries. I no-till, I use cover crops when I can. No-till and weed control is really hard to do. So I've kind of, tried to use cover crops and suppress weeds on our farm. That works well when it rains, but when it doesn't rain, even the weeds slow down a little bit. My neighbor the other day actually gave me another pain point that I'd never thought of before, so I'd like to thank him for this, but that is finding a successor. I'm at the age where I would like to at least look at the end of the line, but I'm the last generation to farm. I have 2 sons who neither one of them have any interest in farming. And so finding that successor to take over a 4th generation farm is what currently keeps me up at night.
What about for you, Sarah?
Just to piggyback on that, the drought is our biggest thing right now. We are hauling water to most of our pastures. That takes up 20 to 30 man hours every week, just moving water across the counties. And it's a time thing where it's our time. It's not the most efficient use of our time. It's a money thing because we're having to buy water tanks. We're having to buy tanks on trailers to be more efficient with moving water. Other things that come up are, both my husband and I work on the farm. So we don't have the off-farm job for insurance and benefits and things like that. So we're very aware of, we have 2 small children, 9 and 6, and so we're aware of when everybody gets sick and what's it going to cost. And so insurance, I think, is going to be a growing concern in agriculture if we want, and if you don't have somebody who works off the farm. And then land prices. As we think about growing our farm, it's a huge thing that's on our minds. Interest rates, land prices, that's going to be determine whether we grow outward and gain more land, or do we try to grow upward and make more use of the land that we currently have?
What about for you, Josh? Big challenges and pain points.
I do think, and it's more than, the current drought obviously has been really bad, but my concern as I look at sort of the climate change world in which we live, and I think most farmers, whether they would acknowledge where it's coming from, farmers are most in tune with the real problems that climate change faces, and it's not just hotter hots, but it's very wildly changing last frosts, first frosts, and then rainfall events, and that's creating havoc with what we're trying to do. And so used to be, you don't want a stretch of hot weather when you're right around the 4th of July with your corn. But now it's not just like, it's kind of hot. It's like 140 with the heat index. And so it's catastrophic sort of stuff. And I think for farmers, and I'm familiar with where all 3 of us are, but Bill and I's farm areas are not that dissimilar. And so you've got some pasture and some farmland. And so I think farmers like myself in that situation are looking at my cropland and like, I can't risk putting it out that much capital for a row crop with the risk that 4 hail events in one season, I just can't do it. Whereas like with cattle at least, there is a perennial system has more resilience in a wildly changing system. You're still subject to ponds going dry, but then they can also fill up in a 2-day event. You just need the 2-day event. But grass has some resilience to it, and so we've looked at our own operation and maybe the only one shifting away from crops and more toward livestock, but in the kind of climate we're in, it's just more stable, I think, than it's really expensive to put a lot behind crops and just get kicked every other week with something different. So sure, directly on my farm, obviously, Kernza fit that mold. Kernza is a perennial grain, and it's great because you harvest the grain, and then you can still run cattle on it the remainder of the year. And so for our operation, it was ideal. It does its own weed control. You don't really have to mess with anything. And the only problem that we began to see year in and year out, even with running cattle on it and manuring it, was fertility problems, which is why, I mean, the other aspect of I think why I was asked to be here today. I advise Nitricity, which is a company that has been working on-farm, smaller scale, electric arc production of nitric acid. So if you're familiar with fertilizer and where it's produced, Homo sapiens gets around 50% of our fertilizer from the Haber-Bosch process, which was invented in 1909. Nothing really has changed much with that original invention. And so prior to that, the Norwegians tried what they called the Birkeland-Eyde process, which basically is like lightning. When lightning strikes, it sort of separates some of the nitrogen in the atmosphere. Some PhD scientists in Stanford have invented a focused electric arc that does that in a shipping container like a lot of the other startups to produce nitric acid. And that was that other pain point. I can run perennial systems, they do great things, but fertility is always an issue. You just always need more, particularly if you're going to ask your land to do more, you need more fertility and especially nitrogen. And you hate being subject to 4 global companies that can change the price at any time.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing we look at is what is the most efficient use of our time. With my husband and I running the operation, and we have one part-time hired hand, there's never enough man hours in the day. So we have been looking more at drone technology. My husband got his commercial drone license, and so we've been using drones to check water sources, check cattle. Really like to see drone use in herbicide application for brush control, Sericea lespedeza, Old World Blue Stem, and things like that. We are also looking into buying some shade balls. The LA Reservoir deployed a bunch of these shade balls to try to help with evaporation, and it worked. And so we're trying to figure out, can we deploy that type of technology on our farm to help with evaporation in the ponds or the stock tanks that we're using and things like that. So we try to find the little things that might make a little bit of difference in the long run, and hopefully it grows exponentially, but just trying to find something that helps.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably the least innovative person in this room. So as far as innovations go, it's kind of hard to come up with something that fits the definition that you had earlier. I don't know where the gentleman is, but he listed the Oxford definition of innovation. For me, it's kind of going backwards a little bit to some of what my ancestors did. In my part of the world, it's always been wheat, fallow, grain sorghum, or some combination thereof. Several years ago, 20 years ago, we started incorporating no-till, which isn't anything all that innovative. But here of late, we've tried to intensify our crop rotation with the wheat, grain sorghum, soybeans, cover crops. That basically, kind of alleviates some of the pressure that I have from weeds, alleviates some of the concerns I have with what you were talking about, Josh, with reliance on chemistries and being beholden to one of the 4 major agribusiness companies in the world. And I'm also able to provide an opportunity for a neighbor to graze cattle. I would love to have cattle, but I live 2 hours away. So I'm working with a younger farmer who's able to graze. And I'm just seeing a lot of benefits from that. And, and I think about how, before I pat myself on the back, I was talking to my aunt who said, oh, your grandpa used to do that 80 years ago. So that's why I say we're kind of reverting back to old technology. But I'm finding I'm reducing costs, which is absolutely paramount because things are just so expensive right now. That's probably the most innovative thing that I do, and that's the one thing that the neighbors drive by my farm and like, what is this guy doing? I mean, so I figured that's a pretty good sign.
I am on social media a lot with our business, and because social media listens to everything we say, I get a lot of random stuff that shows up in my suggested post. But sometimes it is stuff or innovative things that we can think of outside of it. My husband does a lot of research online, and we do look through social media to find innovative things. I do still depend on agricultural publications to look at what research is coming out. We have a younger extension agent, and he is really interested in partnering with producers to what research would help them, what research would help us, and we also have been looking into SARE grants and what research has been done by people who are looking to find solutions to these new problems. Those SARE grants often start with really small, specific problems, but they can be applied to a larger scale. So, and it's a really broad spectrum of where we find our inspiration for innovation, and we can't depend on just one source.
And I think you'll find this, maybe some of the younger producers that you interact with are great early adopters, but they are very busy. My parents are wonderful and loved us, but we are way more engaged in our children's lives than they were even, and that's just a cultural shift. And so we have less time. So the things that I care about the most are what makes it all easier. I want it all easier. So like the number one trait I care about in my cow herd is domesticity. Like I don't want anything that's going to be a fence jumper because I am away most of the time and I can't have anything getting out or she goes to town. And then on the farm side of it, does it make things easier? And one of the things that I've worked through with the Nitricity founders is we saw when people began putting up wind turbines and then solar facilities on the farm maybe 10 or 15 years ago in earnest again. I work mostly in larger industrial scale wind farms and solar arrays, but the individual small ones, you'd see a wind turbine go up and it would work for 6 months and then it would break and that was it. The farmer's like, I'm not climbing 40 foot in the air and fixing this. So we said, if you are going to have a fertilizer factory on a farm in a little shipping container, it has to work in 110-degree heat and either be simple enough to be fixed by that farmer, or you have to offer a service in a region to go around and service those, because if something breaks, early digesters, you saw the same thing. Once sand got in there and ground them up, then the farmer's just like, yep, shutting it off, and you just don't mess with it anymore. It has to be easily fixed, or somebody else has to come in and fix it.
Sarah made the point that I'm fortunate that my wife and I both have off-farm incomes. So having said that, profitability is number one. The farm has to carry its own weight or we're not going to do it. But again, if it fails, then at least have something to fall back on. So I do kind of experiment a little bit with crops and technologies and try some things that might be a little bit unusual. The older I get and the closer I get, hopefully to the end of my career, I'm thinking, I've probably squandered a lot of money that way. It's time that profit is number one. And, a seed that produces more than the next seed is great. But if it costs me more money to produce that extra yield, I don't want it. I want something kind of like Josh's domesticity EPD. I want something that's going to take care of itself. Less fertilizer, less herbicides, but still produces. To me, that's the most important thing right now.
Mm-hmm. I want something that's going to make my life easier. Like I said, man hours are limited. We want to be spending time with our children. I don't want to be out there when I should be at a kid's baseball game or something like that. I want something that I can test on a small scale. Like, I don't want to have to deploy something across thousands of acres to see if it'll work. When we first started our drone, we bought a small drone, figured out how it worked, and then we upgraded to a larger drone that had a video camera, and we figured out how that would work. And now we're debating whether to buy a thermal drone to see how much we can check cattle in the winter if we're missing a pair during calving season. Using that, it's easier to see things with the thermal drone than it is with just a visual drone. But for us, we try to start things on a small scale. We want to test it before we spend all that money to see if it's going to work or not.
Several years ago, I decided it's time to start tracking yields with the combine and yield monitor and cloud platforms and things like that. overlaying that with soil tests, taking in a grid soil sample on all of our farms, and I think I've done that now every 4 years for like 3 cycles. And so I've spent a pretty good amount of money gathering data. And at the end of the day, as I sit here today and I have reams of data printed out on my desk, colorful maps that really look pretty, and I don't have anything. And so I think that's one of the things that concerns me about a lot of innovation is there's a push to sell it, but sometimes I have a hard time figuring out what's the best way to use it for my particular farm. Or in the case of data, I've got this data, I've spent a lot of money on it, but I don't have any real tangible knowledge that's going to help me become more efficient. Maybe I can tweak fertilizer applications here and there, and I do a lot of variable rate fertility. I haven't done variable rate seeding, but I kind of look back and think, all the money I've spent on soil testing and all the money I've spent on platforms, I don't know if I really gained that much at the end of the day, but I've done a pretty good job of, proving my cash flow out to providers.
My father did not do data gathering. He just he ran the farm, he ran the operation. At the end of the year, this is what we made or this is what we lost. I mean, he was horrible about data collection. And when I came back, I tried to start doing cattle software, but when you have somebody going behind you and not keeping track of when he doctors something or when he sells something, a cow he decided to sell, and then I go back through and I'm like, oh, where's this? But so we are trying to start with that data collection, but it does come back to that because I had many conversations with my dad about, should we be recording weaning weights? Should we be recording birth weights? What about all this information we could collect? And at the end of the day, he goes, but what does that benefit us? Like, is that actually going to increase our cash flow? Is it going to benefit us in the long run? And at that time, I couldn't say it would because, if the birth weights or weaning weights change year to year, and we do make adjustments with bulls and things like that, but we need to know how to use that data.
I can think of the top 10 biggest farmers I know in Kansas, and I think one's the very biggest, and they all are incredible about keeping data. So there's no doubt that is the future of agriculture, but if it's not a source of pain, it's harder to focus on. And I really liked that. I can't find him in the audience, but wherever he is, you find that source of pain. One of the things nitricity does, it is making a nitric acid fertilizer, which is not necessarily the best fertilizer for the Corn Belt in Iowa, but it is for the Central Valley of California, which imports 100% of its nitrogen anyway. And so it has found the source of pain for producers in the Central Valley of California. It makes great sense there. When I'm making business decisions, they are almost always around what hurt the most the year before.
AI is dependent on data, and it may be that some of these agricultural companies need to compensate producers for that data. Like, give me a reason. Like, if I keep all this data and I share it with you, give me a little reason to do it. And maybe that's what would help is like, if we keep all this data and give us a reason to share it with you, not just to up your bottom line, but to up our bottom line.
For sure, I think that the agriculture is not the only one that is electrifying, but we have just all over the place. If you start looking at it, you can electrify aspects of the farm economy. And so we're going to see that. I think that you'll start to see producers, including myself. I have 50% of the acres that I farm should have never been broken out 80 years ago in the first place. And so I transitioned quite a bit of it back to cattle, but then I'm also looking at a 40-acre patch and be like, what can, is it solar? Is it something else? Can I take solar and produce something really interesting on it? What can I do with that acreage? Back to, do you do more with the acreage that you have? And it may not be agriculture focused, but that's also very similar to what our predecessor and ancestors have done too. I think that's coming. But then I also think the other big one that's coming, and no surprise to see someone like Myland here as well too. I mean, I think farmers are becoming very sophisticated in the fertility mixes that they are going to use. It used to be a very traditional mix. If they are contractor growers for food companies, they are getting substantial pressure coming down for a more carbon neutral method of fertility. And I think it's an exciting burgeoning space because farmers can do dry, they can do liquid, they can knife in ammonia, they can mix all sorts of different things, they can do a whole host of different types of fertility treatments, and I think we're just starting to see where that goes.
From a cattle operation, like I said, we are using drones, and I would love to see the drone use expand. I don't know if it exists or not. I would love to be able to use a drone to kind of scan my pasture and identify invasive species, if it's Cerisa, if it's Old World Bluestem, if it's other brush. And, they use different herbicides based on what they are. And, could I have a drone scan the property and identify, here's all the Cerisa, and then it just spot sprays. So it saves me money in time instead of doing that. And I really think that drone usage is going to grow in agriculture. And that's one of the biggest things that we're using and I see for the future of ag.
A couple of different things. And Sarah, I love the way that you termed growing up. And I think for a small farm like mine, maybe not my generation, but whoever succeeds me, I think that's going to be their future, is not growing number 2 yellow corn, number 2 yellow soybeans, but perhaps growing food, which I think is super exciting, probably more challenges than I can ever fathom, but I think that is an opportunity for my successor. But yet, at the same time, as I was complaining about platforms and cloud devices, I think there's a lot coming down the pike that will enable us to be far more efficient from a fertility standpoint, seed standpoint, what have you. And I look forward to that technology coming. I just, my caveat to that is I need someone to help me put that data together to make me more efficient. I think the capability is there, but the knowledge to me is not. But I do look forward to learning that and hopefully executing some of those data-based solutions in the future.
Well, with our business, the farm to table business is shortening the supply chain and building relationships with consumers. And that is one of my passions. I love talking with chefs. I love building relationships with my customers. I love selling beef in general, but being able to sell you a steak that you love and then you tell your friends about, that's what I find passion in. Shortening the supply chain, getting people to really know where their food comes from, how it's grown, why it's grown that way. And getting kind of decentralizing not all of ag production, but getting back to the smaller scale of things.
Bringing joy. I know that I must not be a true farmer because what brings me joy is when I'm at the farm and I'm looking at a field of cover crops and I go out there and I pull plants and I just marvel at root structure and soil structure and the fact that cattle are going to be on this crop and turning sunlight into beef. I love that. The wheat, the corn, the grain sorghum, I really don't care about. I love the cover crops because I know that I'm improving my soil. I know I'm putting nitrogen into the soil. The cattle are going to use it. The cattle are going to do good things to the soil. And that brings me immense joy. There's so many ancillary benefits that I just absolutely love that. The other thing though, as cynical and jaded and grouchy as I am at my age, I'm planting wheat, or should be planting wheat right now. I'm going to go to a young pair of guys who run a seed farm near Cortland, Kansas tomorrow to pick up some seed. Those guys fill me with joy. They're young, they're enthusiastic, they are doing good things in their community, they're providing a service to farmers. And anytime I can get around young people who maybe they haven't been kicked in the groin enough. I don't know. But these young folks who are farming, I think they're fewer and farther between, but they inspire me, and they give me a lot of hope and a lot of joy for the future.
I tell this to Bay Area startups all the time too, because I think they envision, I just wish we could all go back to small farms. Some of your best, earliest adopters are some of the biggest farms. And you would be shocked at how many of us sort of look at them and try to learn. And I can't adopt everything that they do. But just for example, my operation is way too small to justify a Kloss combine. But I have noticed my crew that I spend way too much time on social media with that's down in Southwest Kansas, like all the biggest that I know, they're all shifting out of John Deere and driving Kloss. And I'm sitting here saying, boy, something must be cool with that combine. And if I was big enough, I'd probably be right out there getting it, because the people that I watch have all shifted that direction. And so this is probably the same as it was 100 years ago, but the smaller farmers are all looking at those big farmers that are successful and watching what they're doing.
From a smaller operation and cattle operation, my two biggest people are my veterinarian. Luckily, she's also my best friend, so I get to talk to her every week about innovations for cattle health and things like that. And then also our seed stock operators, where we're buying our genetics from. If I have an issue, it's also, it's a small community. I also grew up with the man who provides most of my bulls. So if I have an issue, I call Matt and I ask him. And if he doesn't have it, he has the resources for it. But for me, it's the people I'm closest to, I trust the most. And then we talk about that circle of trust, but that is physical for me. Like, it's the people that I see on a monthly, weekly basis, and I have that relationship with.